Q. Could you tell us how your interest in Islam began? A. It was Margaret, Peggy, Marcus. When I was little, he had a keen interest in music, particularly operas and symphonies, classics considered high level of culture in the West. Music was my favorite subject at school, in which I got the highest grades. By pure chance I heard music Arabic on the radio that pleased me very much, and I was determined to hear more. I didn't leave my parents alone until my father finally took me to the Syrian section in New York City, where I bought a stack of Arabic songs. My parents, relatives and neighbors thought Arabic and its music terribly strange and so displeasing to his ears that when he put my records they required me to close all the doors and windows of my room, so that they would not be disturbed. After I embraced Islam in 1961, I used to sit enthralled in the mosque in New York, listening to recordings of tilawah, Quranic recitation, by the celebrated Egyptian Qari, reciter, Abdul Basit. But in Salat Juma, Friday prayer, the Imam did not play the recordings. We had a special guest that day, one young black man, short, very thin and poorly dressed, who presented himself as a student from Zanzibar, recited Surah Ar-Rahman, a chapter of the Quran. I have never heard such a glorious tilawah, not even from Abdul Basit. He had a voice of gold, certainly. Bilal, a companion of the Prophet, may the mercy and blessings of God be over him, who was in charge of announcing the call to prayer 5 times at the day, should sound like him. I traced the beginning of my interest in Islam at the age of 10. He used to go to a Jewish Reformed Sunday school, and I was fascinated by the historical relationship between Jews and Arabs. From my books I learned that Abraham was the father of the Arabs and also of the Jews. I read how centuries later, when, in Europe, medieval Christian persecution made their lives intolerable, the Jews were fine received in Muslim Spain, and that the magnanimity of that same civilization, Arab Islamic, stimulated Hebrew culture to reach its apex of achievements. Totally unaware of the true nature of Zionism, naively thought that the Jews were returning to Palestine to strengthen the close ties of kinship in Palestine religion and culture with their Semitic cousins. Together believed that Jews and Arabs would cooperate to achieve another Gilded Age of culture in the Middle East. Despite my fascination with the study of Jewish history, was extremely unhappy in Sunday school. At that time, I identified a lot with the Jewish people in the Europe, suffering a horrible fate under the Nazis, and was shocked by none of my classmates or my parents take their religion seriously. During services in the synagogue, children used to read comic books hidden in their prayer books, laughing and mocking of rituals. The kids were so noisy and disorderly that the teachers could not discipline them and found it too difficult to teach. At home, the atmosphere for religious observance was hardly more favorable. My older sister hated Sunday school so much that my mom had to literally drag her out of bed in the morning, and that always it was accompanied by tears and arguments. Finally, my parents were exhausted and let her stop attending. On Jewish holy days, instead of attending synagogue and fasting on Yom Kippur, my sister and I were taken out of school to participate from picnics and family parties to elegant restaurants. When my sister and I convinced our parents of how much we were dissatisfied in Sunday school, they joined an organization, agnostic humanist, known as the Ethical Culture Movement. The Ethical Culture Movement, it was founded in the late 19th century by Felix Alder. While studying for the rabbinate, Felix Alder became convinced that devotion to values ethical as relative and man-made constituted the only adequate religion for the modern world, considering any relationship with the supernatural or irrelevant theology. I attended Sunday School of Ethical Culture every week from the age of 11 until my graduation, at 15. I came to agree entirely with the ideas of the movement, and he viewed all organized and traditional religions with contempt. When I was 18, I became a member of the local Zionist youth movement, known as Mizrachi Hatzer. But when I found out what the nature of the Zionism, which made the hostility between Jews and Arabs irreconcilable, came out disgusted several months later. When I was 20 years and studying at New York University, one of my elective courses was entitled Judaism in Islam. My teacher, the Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cash, head of the Department of Hebrew Studies, did not spare efforts to convince his students, all Jewish, many of whom aspired to become rabbis, that Islam derived from Judaism. Our textbook, written by him, took each verse of the Quran, tracing it diligently to its supposed Jewish source. Although his real goal was to prove to his students the superiority of Judaism over Islam, he convinced me diametrically of the opposite. I soon discovered that Zionism it was merely a combination of the racist and tribal aspects of Judaism. Modern secular nationalist Zionism was even more discredited in my eyes when I learned that few, if any, of the leaders of Zionism were observant Jews, and perhaps in no other place traditional Orthodox Judaism was viewed with as much contempt as in Israel. When I found that almost all the important Jewish leaders in America who supported Zionism did not feel the less pain of conscience for the terrible injustice inflicted on the Palestinians, I could no longer consider myself a Jew in my heart. One morning in November 1954, the Professor Cash, during his lecture, argued with irrefutable logic that the monotheism taught by Moses, may the mercy and blessings of God be upon him, and the divine laws revealed to him were indispensable as a basis for all the highest ethical values. If the moral was purely man-made, like ethical culture and other philosophies agnostics and atheists taught, could be easily changed according to how whim, convenience or circumstance. The result it would be chaos, leading to individual and collective ruin. The belief in the afterlife, as the rabbis and the Talmud taught, argued the Professor Cash, it was not just a wish, but a moral necessity. Only those, he said, who firmly believed that each of us will be summoned by God on the day of judgment to present an account of our life on earth and rewarded or punished accordingly, will possess the self-discipline to sacrifice transient pleasure and endure hardship and sacrifices to achieve the highest good.